straightforward, and it's a very nice way to go about this. Next picture, please. Okay, so the concept behind the technology is pretty simple. If you look at the left side of the picture, you can see conceptually how it works. You have a wood stove, there's a fire, smoke rises, goes up the chimney, and at the very top of the picture, you see a little box on the right-hand side, which is green, and that's enlarged on the right side of the picture. Next, please. Thank you. Yeah, I think we got two pictures at the same time. That's okay. So the box on the right-hand side where you see the flashing lightning basically generates about 30,000 volts, a high voltage. That voltage gets transferred to an electrode where it says sharp edges. The sharp edges basically make it easier for the electrons to disperse inside the flue. It creates an electromagnetic field, basically. Next picture. Smoke particles rise, and as they rise, the electrons which are inside this field will attach to the smoke particles and will draw them to the side, basically taking them out of the smoke. So it's an invisible filter, if you will. It's the electrons that do all the work, and it's the old electrostatic principle, which is of course nothing new. Next slide, please. So to illustrate how this would work, here's a picture looking down from the top of the stack into your flue. You can see on the right-hand side, you have the electrode. It's approximately 6 feet long. And this is a clean flue before the test. Next slide, please. So this picture now shows testing the stove with 48 pounds of wood. You can see very light deposits. You can see some larger flakes that are lining the inside of the flue. And this is without the electrostatic precipitator active. You can see it's already installed, but it's not turned on. Next, please. So with the electrostatic precipitator now turned on, this is with 3.5 pounds of kindling wood after 14 minutes. You can see pretty heavy deposits, very, very fine dust, basically all the stuff that would go into the air, but with the electrostatic field, all the very, very fine dust particles are filtered out and deposited on the flue. Next, please. Then at the end of the startup phase, that's about just, 135 minutes, 2 hours and 15 minutes later, you have a total amount of 13 pounds of wood burned. You can see quite a lot of deposit of ash already sticking to the chimney. Next, please. And this is at the end of the hot phase, about 4 3/4 hours later, with a total amount of 31 pounds of wood burned. You can see quite a considerable amount of dust building up with the electrostatic precipitator, of course, always switched on. Next, please. So I'm sure you've heard about the issue of reentrainment, where the flakes ultimately will become so large that they break off, and the hot air in the chimney will just carry them out to the outside, and they will typically deposit around your chimney anywhere, within 10, 20 feet off the point of emission. The point, though, is these are big chunks. You can't breathe them in, obviously. They don't go into the air. They just break off. These are particularly black, which means that there's a poor burn. There's a lot of tar in there. And these are just examples of what this might look like. Next, please. So to show you that this has been tested around different parts of the world, I want to give you some basic numbers here. These are tests which were performed in Nelson, New Zealand back in January 2014. And testing on a clean stove, obviously, while it's not redundant, it doesn't show you much. So what they try to pick is some of the dirtiest stoves that they could find. The first one is what they call day one. They tested on 100% Gillis coal, Creek coal. Day two, you had a mix of 50% coal and 50% of wet native wood with a moisture content of 33%. And day three, they took a different type of coal, the Red Dale coal, and the same thing with local wood, which was still pretty green and pretty wet. They broke it down into the startup phase, the hot phase, and the low phase. And they had different samples, 1 and 2. They mixed them in different ratios, and they give you the average temperature in centigrade. And, excuse me, this test basically shows that in the low phase of the cooling off phase of your wood stove, the reduction of fine dust particles is anywhere between 90 to 97%. And if you figure in all the phases, meaning the dirty startup phase where you get the poorest combustion and most of the dust being generated, it's still anywhere between 58 to 65%. Again, that's figuring in the dirty startup phase. Next, please. Then this is a test which was performed in Austria, so I apologize for the German labeling. Tag means day, not a tag in the sense of an American tag. So this ran for 92 days. And you have at the bottom, it says Messpunkt, which means point of measure. They took a lot of different measuring points. And you can see on day one, there were 16 different measuring points. By day 57, there were only 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's about just 10. And there's a little bit of variance in them. But you can see the end left column says 95 through 100% Abscheidegrad, which means the degree of the fine particle separation. So most of these are anywhere between, let's say, 98 to over 99%. There's some lower ones, but even the lower ones are still over 97%. And this is 15 different types of particles between 3 and 300 nanometers, which is, the 3 nanometers is, I believe, if I do my math right, a tenth, it's 0.25, 0.3 of a PM, so way, way smaller in PM 2.5. And 300 nanometers, of course, is a lot bigger. And those are not the problem particles that we're talking about. Next slide, please. Here are some more Austrian results. This is from the October 24 testing, where they took essentially 3 types of operation. One was normal, one was what they call a tarry operation, and the other one is more sooty, has a little bit more fine dust. And they took different temperatures. They measured the velocity in the chimney. They looked at the exhaust gas, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide. And they looked at the total dust. And here again, this is total dust, which means larger particles and, of course, very, very fine dust. And the efficiency in normal operation was anywhere between 93%. For the PM1, which is, of course, smaller than PM 2.5, you were at 97%, and PM8, which is somewhere in between, still at 97%. This is for the normal operation. And then they changed it slightly. Not entirely sure why the sooty operation is a little off here on the total dust. I'm not sure what that truly means. The key thing, though, is to remember that what we're looking for is the very small, fine particles, not the larger particles.
Well, that would be my question, Nico.
Yep.
Nico, that would be my question. Between the PM1 and the PM8, it goes from 96 to 68. Would that progression be going down from there? Like, say, if you had a PM12 particle, it would be at 50%. So that really it's about, non-capture of things that we're not really worried about, which is larger particles.
Indeed, and that's exactly the point. I think you're making a good point. The reason this is so is because the bigger the particle is, the more difficult the electrostatic precipitator has in separating it. That's because it has a lot more kinetic energy. and at a certain speed, it will just fly right through the electromagnetic field. But the very fine dust, the stuff that we breathe in, which does not have the same kinetic energy, is much easier to deflect, being attached by the electrons and being deflected out of the stream. So it has to do mainly with the kinetic energy of the size of the particles.
So can we assume then that it's fairly linear or not?
Good question. My hunch is it's not going to be linear, but that's something I will be happy to look into.
I was just wondering because, you know, we need to, PM1, we're looking obviously at something in between these two, and so I'm curious if there's a drop off or, you know, what we might be doing.
Right. But the point again, I think, is that the key size that EPA is concerned about is PM 2.5, and even PM 10 is not a key issue here anymore, and the smaller those particles are, the higher the degree of separation of removal from the air. But I can look at the overall, statistically, how that performs for these different particle sizes.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So here again, another quick test. This was a long-term test performed in October 2017. These are actual field tests, not lab tests, where they had 2 seasons with 3 very old and high-emission burners, where each of them was tested anywhere between 630 to 1,088 hours per season, and the data was collected every 10 seconds. And if you look at the total dust reduction, whatever that means to you, 22, 39, and 84 milligrams per cubic meter, that translates roughly, the first one, the 22 milligrams per cubic meter, translates into about 1/10 of EPA standard, meaning EPA standard is 2.5 grams per hour. That's the new 2020 standard, and that would be about 2.2 grams per hour. So, which puts the 84 milligrams per cubic meter approximately to 1 gram per hour. So well below the 2020 EPA standards. The efficiency of the TSP, total suspended particulate matter removal, in all of these cases was above 83%. And for the finer dust here, again, the numbers show the smaller it gets, the higher the efficiency of removal. And Thomas Brunner, who ran these tests in Austria, is one of the leading experts in this field. So we got his permission to use this data. Next slide, please. So let's look very briefly at the technical features of the EcoTube. It's essentially what I refer to as a plug-and-play device. You can install it. Once it's installed, it will automatically start. And you have a little thermocouple in there, which as soon as it detects a change in temperature in the flue, then it will kick in. The total consumption of the unit is under 30 watts per hour, typically somewhere between 22 to 25 watts per hour. And so that translates into essentially like a very small light bulb. If you want to keep it in a standby mode, let's say in the summer months, if you don't use it, you can do that. And then the total power consumption is less than 0.7 watts per hour, equivalent to something like a very small LED light, a night light. Next page. So the most basic model that we have installed so far here, at least here in North America, and I wouldn't even say around the world because the need for bigger units has increased. But the standard model is what they refer to as the EcoTube, which is for any kind of wood stoves or boilers up to 300,000 BTU. UekoSolve provides, they offer units which go up to 10 million BTUs. Those are more for larger commercial boilers. As a matter of fact, the ones that I'm currently retrofitting here in Massachusetts in the state school districts are 1 million BTU or above. It really fits any kind of chimney type and size. It can be installed, as I mentioned earlier, either up on the roof or inside the building right next or above the wood stove. And a key question that I keep on getting asked is if that stack needs to be scrubbed, if it needs to be cleaned, do we need to remove all of this? And the answer is no. You can just run a brush up and down the chimney. Chimney sweep can do that. So no need to remove anything. The electrode just deflects. So it's very easy to service. Next
Hey,
slide.
Nico?
Yes.
Nico, actually, why don't you pause for 1 second? Mike Prox actually brought in an example of the electrode and the mount.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, I can see he's handling it right now. Yep, great.
Oh,
Is that the long one, about 5.5 to 6 feet?
Yes.
no.
Oh.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I guess 5.
It's
Yeah.
almost taller than he is.
Yeah.
Well, you note that the mounting bar is rigid, fairly robust, and the electrode itself is flexible. Because that was my question yesterday: is do you have to remove those components to sweep the stack?
And the brush would go around this and
Right.
down here. Probably wouldn't work so good if you drug the brush back up through it. But that would be only a consideration.
So Nico, are you still recommending that we use the nylon brush that we used when we cleaned jeans blue?
Indeed, because the nylon brush will typically work its way around the electrode much easier. A steel one probably would do it too, but just because you want to reduce the risk of, because it's much more rigid, that it might possibly bend the electrode. It's stainless steel, so it's like a measuring tape. You can probably look at it, but I think if you pull it up too hard, there's a possibility that the electrode might bend up too, and then it might create some arcing. So yes, the short answer is I would certainly recommend a nylon brush.
And can you talk more, this is Katherine, more about the behind the wood stove install? Is that simply the electronics being installed inside, or is that, so how are you attaching your little flexible thing?
This goes in.
So what is called the EcoTube inside essentially is, it looks like a T section that has the electrode already mounted in there. Maybe we can go back to the picture in a moment. But that's really all it is. The controls, the electronic controls that generate the 30,000 volts are essentially a small box which you can mount to the side on the wall or somewhere, and they're just connected with a cable.
Right, so you're still coming in through the top of the stack.
Yes, absolutely. And typically, if you have a T in there, then you can open the bottom of the T, because any kind of dust that you're sweeping out of the chimney, you can collect by opening the T, and then it just falls right through, rather than let's
Nico,
say, yep.
This is Doug Isaacson with Minto Development. A question: if this is collecting a lot of dust, does the efficiency decrease the more dust that collects on the sides of the stack?
Very good question. Again, we might go back to that slide from earlier. As the dust builds up, let's see here, one a little bit further, go back more. Actually, go forward one more. That one there, right there. So you can see day one, tag one, which is day one, you have a removal efficiency of around about 99%. And now look at day 92 at the very right, it goes down a little bit. So it's an excellent question. The efficiency of removal obviously goes down a little bit, but you're still looking at 97% plus. So the electromagnetic field, the electrostatic field goes right through the deposits on your smokestack, and there is only a very, very slight decrease in the efficiency.
So you only have to clean your stack once a season?
Well, yeah, that's one of those questions that you know, when you ask what kind of mileage do you get out of a car, how many miles per gallon do you get on a car, it all depends on how much you drive it. If you have a stove that you operate 24/7, you know, 10 months out of the year, I would highly recommend that there's probably even just a monthly test, because the last thing you want is a lot of creosote and tar building up. But in Switzerland or Europe, Scandinavia, for instance, where you have a lot cleaner burning devices, typically what EcoSolve recommends is 1 extra cleaning per year. So there should be at least 1 cleaning a year of your smokestack, and you may want to consider at least a second one. But if you have a very dirty burning stove, you may even need a third or fourth cleaning. So it depends a lot on the degree of how heavily that stove, your boiler, is used.
And if you're using your stove, as we would say in the borough, properly, again, are you using clean, dry wood? Are you burning, you know, a lot of wet wood? What kind of fuel are you running through it?
Yep,
You know, so
those are all important factors. Absolutely right.
So chimney sweep can become a new profession again.
Well, I'll tell you what, when I installed the filters here in Massachusetts on these schools, they use top-notch, top-of-the-line pellet stoves manufactured by Maine Energy Systems. And we opened up these, the chimney, and they've been operating for 2 years. There was barely a teaspoonful of dust in there. And now with the filter installed, I told them, well, I think once a year will absolutely suffice, but just keep an eye on it at least to get kind of a feel on how much is being filtered out. And from the test down in New Zealand, you saw how much deposited from really dirty stuff with coal and green wood. You get a lot of stuff being deposited, which on one hand is extra cleaning of your device. On the other hand, it's good news. You're retaining all this dust and preventing it from getting to the ambient air.
So you had a slide that talked about the efficiency when it got colder. Now I know that talks about internal temperature of the stack. However, at external temperatures, when it's 20 to 40 below, how has that performed? Has there been any changes? Have you tested it up here at all?
Well, I think the best person to ask is Jean Olson, who has had her filter now operating since November 2017. Her perception is that it's been performing extremely well. She's gotten a lot of re-entrainment, a lot of sooty material depositing. And I don't know what the temperatures were like last year, but I'm sure you had days of minus 30s where it did really, really well. And, you know, there is indication, it's not been certified, it hasn't been verified yet, but there's an indication that in this super cold Arctic climate, your secondary aerosols will also deposit at a much higher rate using the ESP than not having it. But again, that's not been substantiated yet. There is indication that that's the case.
Thanks.
Really hard to understand. Can someone restate that without all the breakup?
There's 2 parts. There's the solid particulate paper that goes through, and the uncondensed. Condensed better or worse here than in other places.
Right.
The jury's out on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
You're breaking up a little bit, so I didn't catch everything, but so if there's a question, just you may want to repeat it. I didn't quite understand what you said.
Yeah, we're mutually crackly, Nico.
We have something electrostatic going on in the line.
Okay, so let's just finish the presentation. I'm almost done with it. So let's go back one more. Let's see here. Yeah, okay, next slide, yep. So what can we conclude from this? We know, and that's been proven over and over around the world, that the electrostatic precipitators substantially reduce fine dust particles from point sources. And I'm just going to be so bold to say that there is really no doubt about it. It's just a question of now verifying it locally that that's the case in an Arctic environment. That it greatly improves the ambient air quality, therefore, it's economically viable. That's something I'm sure you will at least get into. The installation is pretty straightforward. It's not a complicated process to install these things. It's fully automatic and has very low operating costs. It's simple to clean. No need to mess around with, removing anything. And so far, there is an excellent proven operating track record. These systems have been operating for 10 years plus now, with a very, very low incidence of some of these systems breaking down. So they've had an excellent track record in all kinds of climates. And next slide, please. Okay, so I'll be very happy to answer questions. There is my contact if you want to follow up with anything. But in a nutshell, that's the technology behind it. I've not looked at the larger units because in principle, they operate the same way. It's just that I guess these are not something that you're focusing on very much in the borough for now, I assume. Any further questions? Okay. Can you still hear me? Are you still there?
Yes, we're here.
Okay, I wasn't sure whether I lost the line. I'm sorry. Okay, very good.
No. I tried to mute us all so we wouldn't get so much static, but it didn't seem to help. One of the questions was cost.
Yep. So, yes, I understand that as an issue that people often talk about, the cost. It doesn't come for free. What I have always said is if somebody orders an individual unit and I have to ship that particular unit from Switzerland, custom made, ready to be fitted on your smokestack, that's the most expensive possible way you can go. And those typically have been, depending a little bit on the design, whether it's an inside tube or an outside and on top of the roof, what the diameter is of the T-section, but you're looking at about $2,000 for something like that. The understanding I have reached with the Swiss company is that they have absolutely no interest or intent, for that matter, to manufacture all of these things in Switzerland. So when we talk about a bulk production here in North America, or specifically in Alaska, there are substantial savings I think one can figure in there. First of all, your shipping costs will go down dramatically. Secondly, and I assume that's something I can go by, to get all the sheet metal work for this done in Alaska or here in the US, in the lower 48, would presumably be a lot cheaper too. So that, and it would also create local jobs, of course. So I hate to give you a hard and fast number, but I feel pretty confident that something like that will knock off a few $100. And the other question, of course, to be asked is, if this is a nonprofit behind it that is essentially looking to purchase them as cheaply as possible, and there are no intermediaries, like a salesperson who's trying to make a buck on this, that would, of course, also be a huge saving. So these are things that need to be explored. But at the moment, yes, I understand it's not the cheapest way to do it, to order them one by one from Switzerland. And it's certainly not the way I intend to go with this.
Hey, Nico?
Yes.
This is Jomo. Are you speaking through your computer mic, or did you dial in using a landline?
This is the computer mic. I can use a landline if you like.
Can you try dialing in with the landline, and we'll see if that doesn't help?
Give me a second. I'll do that right away. I'll just see. What number do you want me to dial in on? Can you give it to me?
Sure. It's 929.
Yep.
4336
Sorry, I lost you there. Could you repeat 929?
Yeah, I figure. 929 436
Yep.
2866.
Yep.
That's 2866. And then the code will be 964
Yep.
514 325.
Let me try that right away and see how it works. Hold on a second.
While when we were speaking yesterday, I identified a number of potential market opportunities relative to this technology. Again, one, of course, is the stack cleaning. You will obviously need to clean your stack. There's installation, maintenance, but also, again, as he noted, potential manufacturer. What he said yesterday was that the Swiss company is okay, both like just selling the electronics that operate the system and manage it.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello.
This is
Nico
Nico
now on the phone.
Okay.
Is this
There's
better?
one thing you'll need to do. Yes. Try muting your computer.
I have
I have
muted,
muted my computer.
Because now you're a little echoey. You've muted the computer, Mike?
I've muted my computer now.
I'm muting, yeah.
Oh, let's mute.
Yeah, that,
Okay, let's try again.
you don't know if that's
Okay, does that work better?
Yes.
Yeah,
better.
It's a little better.
Yeah, you still break up a little bit, but I can still hear pretty well.
Satellite's down. You're on microwave.
It's
It is better.
We are on the far side of the world, sir, so apologies. But I just
Okay.
noted for everybody, again, you and I had discussed a number of the potential market opportunities relative to this technology, and I just kind of walked through those. Installation, cleaning, maintenance, but as well as potential manufacture of the ancillary bits, which is to say the stuff, not the electronics.
That's right. The Swiss, the only thing that they would supply is their intellectual property, their proprietary technology, which I refer to as the little black box. That's the only thing that they would supply. Everything else we can do here stateside.
Good questions.
Nico, could you mention the type of steel that's used in manufacture in Switzerland?
Well, my understanding is they're using the highest grade stainless steel, which I believe here is referred to as the 319 stainless.
So what's your relationship, Nico? Are you the North American agent or what?
I'm the North American agent and facilitator because there is such a lot of interest in really a number of states. It started out, of course, in Europe in Fairbanks, but in the meantime, the state of Massachusetts is requiring this here in all public buildings that use wood stoves. I'm getting a lot of new interest out of Canada, even the West Coast, California certainly, and I've installed some in Minnesota and in New Hampshire. So the only way I can do it, because a Swiss company can't do it from Switzerland, is to facilitate this business for local partners that want to run it locally, that want to create local value, so that it's not possible to do this from one location, let's say from Massachusetts or wherever it might be. So yes, I'm the facilitator who's helping the Swiss company set that up. That's correct.
And is the EPA initiating testing and such so that they can take a stand in things, or is that begun or imagined, or?
Well, again, the short answer is yes, but it's a little bit longer-winded process. We were invited in November down to the National Mall in Washington to participate at the national competition. And we demonstrated this unit. Of course, we had the top EPA people there, and they were very excited. Nick Zarnecki, your clean air manager, was there too. and Glenn Miller was there. And we discussed including the EcoTube into the series SIP. And that was a discussion I held with Larry Brockman from EPA together with Nick. And the short of it was that EPA was very, very interested in supporting Fairbanks, the borough's efforts to have this device included in the series SIP. In other words, yes, there's testing going on. I understand the borough wants to get the EPA to approve this device for the series SIP. So these things are all ongoing.
Okay, other questions?
Is Jean's stack instrumented? I mean, it's operating, but and she's getting some dust.
Gene Olson, you're referring to?
Yep, Gene Olson, 2. Oh.
Yes,
Anyway,
what we did was we installed 2 devices up in the borough, both in North Pole. Gene Olson has the regular device on top of the stack on the outside, and Tim I think Courier is his name. He has a pellet stove, and he installed the inside filter at his house. And they're, as far as I'm concerned, I haven't heard anything to the contrary. They're working well and are being used currently, yes.
But they're not instrumented.
Okay. Well, they were. Jeannie has a...
Yeah, but they're no longer
No,
instrumented.
correct.
It was a test last winter. Right?
Can you see, Ms. Lee, from any of those numbers if Ms. Olson is on?
She's not.
She's not.
She's in surgery right now.
Okay. What Nico said yesterday was that they did run some numbers, relative to the wattage usage as far as ongoing costs. And I thought you said that essentially 18 cents per kilowatt hour. How much was it, Nico? Like $30 a year?
Yeah, that's right. Approximately, that's correct, per year. So if you break it down, you're depending a little bit on how much you run it, and there's a lot of variables. So, but anywhere between $2 a month to $3 a month tops at the very most, depending on your power cost and how much you use the wood stove.
A relatively low cost of use.
Yes, I think it's manageable. Yes.
Would you discuss what interactions you've had with the state of Alaska, particularly the Department of Environmental Conservation, as they're now kind of lead on some of this vis-a-vis the borough? And I'm talking about including the technology in the SIP.
I personally have not had any contact whatsoever to the state of Alaska. My contact was always to the borough, where I have worked pretty closely with your clean air manager. And as already pointed out, I have testified twice to the assembly on these units. And I have really had a lot of contact with EPA. Region 10 contacted me at the end of last year. They are looking to start a large testing program to get this certified. So this was out of Region 10 down in Seattle. But I've not been in touch with the state of Alaska, with the DEC.
Patrice?
Testing happened with the Testo 380, which is a highly sensitive device. It's not the best device, which would be a Condor, which runs in the tens of thousands, or maybe way more than that. But Testo showed really great reduction from 62 to 90%, depending. The challenge with Jean's stove is that she burns so cleanly to begin with. And so we did see, because there was just a little bit of fine particulate, the re-entrainment come down on the roof, look like little dried up raisins. It did just what it said it was supposed to do. And as far as the cleaning goes, I recall it taking us about 15 minutes max between getting the brush out of the box and screwing it on and going up. And, it wasn't a big ordeal to clean it. And if you had a dirty stove, you'd probably want to be on the safe side and clean it a little more often. Would you agree, Nico?
Oh, absolutely. Maybe the only other thing I can add to TESTA 380. So the borrower right now is looking to test the TESTA 380 as part of the certification for the Series SIP. The Brookhaven National Laboratories, which of course are part of the Department of Energy, they did a test of the EcoTube down in Washington in November. Gene was there too, of course, for this, and Nick was there. And excuse me, pardon my voice. They came up with a unofficial. I'm saying unofficial because it needs to be released and by NYSERDA, which funded the test. But they came up with a removal rate which is equivalent to what the numbers I've given you. So I understand the test is a qualitative, not a quantitative test. And so therefore, the borrower is looking to test that through the testing program now, which I understand there will be an RFP for pretty soon that the borrower will issue.
So a general question, Nico, this might involve several other members in this room, but has there been any computation as to figure out if we were to have a device such as this in our high unattainment areas such as North Pole, would this substantially get us within the EPA required clean air, or how much further out would we still be? Is there any indication?
Boy, you're asking all the right questions here, of course. The truth of it is that this has not been performed, I guess, anywhere in the world where you have an area of serious non-attainment, such as some of the hot spots in North Pole, that people are, looking to address that. There's different answers I can give you. The first answer is that for most wood stoves, and even the dirty ones that we tested in DC in November, which was a very basic, dirty burning wood stove, we got very, very high rates of removal, which would bring those stoves into the EPA 2020 standard, meaning 2.5 grams per hour. It would be below that threshold. Currently, there are virtually no wood stoves at all in North America that can reach that threshold. That's the first question. The second question is whether you can improve the ambient air quality sufficiently. And the answer probably is a mixture of A, what are you burning? B, meaning what kind of wood stoves do you have, what kind of technology you have, and B, what is the saturation in such a hot spot? If you just put in a couple of these filters, one could probably safely assume that it's not going to make a major dent into the air quality. But if you do what I refer to a cluster study, that you take a hot spot, put in, I have no idea whether it requires 50 or 100 of these filters. That's something to be determined. But you saturate that hot spot with those filters and run the test. Then hopefully the empiric data that you collect from that will give you the answer. At least from what I've seen in other countries like Switzerland or Austria that use this, there are no ambient air quality problems whatsoever because a lot of these wood stoves are retrofitted with the filters. But yes, indeed, that is the big challenge, to know for sure that it will be, that it will make a substantial impact on the ambient air quality. After all, it's not just wood smoke that is creating a problem in the ambient air quality. There are other point sources. So we have to look at all of those to make an educated guess. And I think Nick Zarnecki certainly will be much more qualified to make such a statement, because I think he's run some air quality modeling and he would be more qualified to speak to that.
Thanks. All right.
Katherine, did you have something?
I did. I have a couple questions for you. One is, have you used this on outdoor wood boilers? Have you yet done that?
A definite yes. Yes, indeed. What the example I cite is in Minnesota, a large warehouse, and they had big smoke problems. The local community was essentially telling them to shut down the outdoor wood boiler, where they're burning a lot of wood scraps from wooden crates and pallets. And their heating costs with gas at that warehouse were over $5,000 a month. So they were looking for a solution to clean up the air, the smoke from their outdoor boiler. I came in, we installed it. I looked at the boiler. There were issues with creosote and tar buildup in the boiler, so we took care of that. And the problem has gone away. They have no more smoke, and the local community is very satisfied with it. So their payback on something like this, I think, was 10 days on their investment.
If I might, I also understood Jean Olson to say that she saw a dirty stove example in the mall, and it concerned her greatly because of the potential for stack fires. Can you say more? You don't seem to be expressing that concern.
Well, the smokestack fires obviously are an issue no matter what, whether you have an EcoTube or not. It's an issue of how clean your stove burns. The EcoTube is not going to increase or decrease that risk. Well, you could say probably increase the risk that there might be a fire if you have a lot of tar and creosote building up in your smokestack. But that in itself is not the risk. The risk is that you have to clean the stack, and there will be no, the EcoTube is not a source of a fire in itself.
No, but it's,
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
No, go on.
Nothing.
So it just might increase the frequency, the need of additional cleaning.
That's right. If you have a wood stove and you're burning poorly, because the clean wood stoves, the wood chips or pellets that burn really pretty clean, they have barely any carbon or soot in there or any tar. It's essentially gray dust. It's just ash. Ash will not burn in itself. It's the organic materials that in the secondary aerosols that are actually the hazard. So if you have a wood stove and you have a lot of tarry buildup and creosote, you have to scrub your chimney no matter what. The EcoTube will just take out even more of these pollutants, and so the frequency of cleaning will increase. That's all. But it's not a source of risk per se. The EcoTube is not a source of the risk.
Yeah, you make right. Well, I have another question for you, and that is the motivation. So I keep thinking in Fairbanks, how is it, what's going to motivate people to go out and spend $2,000 to put this on their stove? And I'm curious if you could speak to what you've seen be the motivation. You told us obviously about the wood boiler, and that's a very clear motivation. And you also said that these seem to be widely popular in Europe, so there's clearly a motivation there, or it's just what you do. Can you speak to that? What, you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to sell these. What motivates people to buy these?
Yeah, I'm to be quite fair, I'm not trying to give you a sales pitch here. I'm trying to educate people a little bit on it. But
well,
yes,
I'm trying to understand. I mean, it's a real,
yep.
We need to know this as a community.
Of course. Now, what motivates you to do this, of course, is ultimately a political regulatory issue, which goes way beyond anything that I can control. What my personal opinion on this is that if you have a wood stove and you're emitting pollutants, which might be a risk to the neighbor, to your community, then you bear the responsibility to minimize that risk. It's just like smoking, for instance. A lot of people, smoking has been banned from a lot of restaurants because it's a nuisance to other patrons. And equally, every car is fitted with a killer converter for the simple reason that you're trying to avoid pollution from getting into the ambient air. So, but that again, I can only emphasize is a political decision, which it goes beyond anything scientific. The motivation ultimately is, if you allow me to say it that way without wanting to be facetious about it, the question is, what is the value of good health? What is the payback on going to the doctor? If you're sick, what's the payback on doing that? It's hard to put a dollar value on your health. And I guess I read Mayor Ward's op-ed, was it early December, where he really tried to appeal to the boroughs, saying, well, we've got to take care of this because it just impacts everything that we do. So, but at the end of the day, it's a political decision, it's a legal decision, because if EPA says you're not in compliance, you're serious non-attainment area, and it has some real financial implications, and whether or not those penalties come, I have no idea. I can only make some assumptions. That hopefully should be motivating factors to act on this and to do something about the community that you live in.
Thank you.
But that's just my personal opinion.
Okay. Well, Niko, I think we have run out of questions, but it was an excellent presentation. We really do appreciate your time.
Well, I really appreciate your interest, and thank you for your time. I'm available for any follow-up questions here, and I know that there's a lot of activity by the private sector trying to figure out how to move forward with this. If you have some ideas, if I can be of any help, then use me as a resource.
Well, thank you, and definitely it is something that needs to be considered and talked about. You know, I think several members of the air quality group are here with us today, and hopefully the community and the state will come to a solution on this. You know, whether it's legislative or it just is Alaskans deciding to help make their society a little bit better.
Yep, so, indeed. Very good. Well, thank you so much to everyone, and I look forward to working with you here in the future.
Thank you, Niko.
Thanks.
Thanks again. Nico. Take care. Yeah. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Catherine hit on $64,000 question for motivation. At
Well,
the community level, it's a no-brainer, but
Well,
on the individual level, it's more difficult.
What is it?
in my mind, there are a couple things. Again, there's a number of things here that are purely local. It's on the local level. And these things have a cost. We feel like this is something we would want to mandate. Well, then we may need to come up, just like with the natural gas stuff, we may need to come up with a way to help people defray that cost. As far as the borough and the testing, again, if we want it to be part of the SIP, well, we need to make sure that it would have an impact and quantify that impact. And so that's purely on the local level.
On the, well, it is tough. On the individual level, there's a few people that are interested in this. I actually haven't talked to, well, just one person, if you will, that would have outdoor wood boiler size. That's roughly the 300,000 BTU is what they're outputting. If you're talking $2,500 and you're burning 10, 15 cords of wood and your neighbors kind of are complaining about the smoke, it might be worth it. And it, on a community level, it's so nebulous of what actually does affect something, but everybody's complaining that the outdoor wood boilers are the most serious. Well, $2,500 versus $12,000 that they're talking about to replace them, that's kind of a good deal too from the community level.
Patrice, did you have something?
Oh, just that in EPA terms, it's called picking up pennies. I don't see that any one situation is going to totally clean up our air, but I see this as being able to take a significant chunk, and depending on how we operate it. And I think Mike is exactly right. You know, motivation as a community is one thing, individually is another, and we're never going to be able to force people to do anything. I mean, the best is if we can show them that being responsible and meeting them halfway getting some help, insisting that they have it properly installed and properly, clean it properly. It's really important. And, you know, those are details to be worked out. But Gene and I have talked for hours and hours and hours over how this all might work in a co-op. And Mike has been involved with Gene and really taken the bull by the horns here. If we had a co-op situation, we could provide incentives, and I've talked with Niko about that, for being able to prove that you did more than just one basic cleaning. You get it for a price, and it includes one cleaning, so you get shown how to do it.
One a year.
It's not hard, but just making sure everybody knows that it's not hard, it's not daunting, how to do it. And then if you were to say that you would send in a photo of you doing a second cleaning during the year with a little date on it or whatever, or you had somebody do it and you submitted the bill, a picture of it, to send it in, that would get you a further discount. You know, I mean, there's just a lot of ideas. We've got good brains in all over Fairbanks. We can figure this out.
Okay, anything else?
I was going to point out, just as a user, I can heat my home with wood for $1,500 a year. To do it with diesel now costs about $4,000. If they force us over to ultra low sulfur diesel or natural gas at its natural price, it'll be $6,000, $7,000. So if I can spend $2,500 and not have to be forced in that direction, there's your motivation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The hammer is ultimately going to be the motivator.
Right. And that sounds like.
Yeah. Which I don't like to sell on that
Yeah.
basis, but that's reality.
But that's actually, that is something people will accept
Right.
far more than your regulations. Your regulations just not. But the economics of it makes total sense.
Okay.
You must live in North Pole.
No, I live in Fairbanks.
Really?
We're infecting everybody.
We're in Hamilton Acres. My wife's Lori.
And I understand they have a hot spot over there.
We do.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it have an effect too if you're fire wood stove lover, you do it, you save money and all that, and you're not forced, but a program comes up that at least has incentives type of thinking, so it's not being forced down your throat. So you end up doing it, and you do cleanings, and it comes rattling out of the chimney, and you say, maybe there's something about this because it's here instead of up in the air. Isn't that psychological and real? I mean, if you're doing the cleaning and you know you're putting in dry wood, you're doing the best you can, and it's still precipitating. Okay, well, I'm glad there was a path. I mean, we don't have, the carrot and the stick has to be pretty balanced.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can find some more carrots, if we can get some incentive and participation and do them, and I'd sure like to have 100 operating so we know whether or not it's baloney. Yeah, well, it's not baloney, but I'd like people, individuals, to be able to prove to themselves when they don't believe social media, they don't believe the government telling them the truth. Let's have some examples.
So I was shocked when I was up on the roof watching the reentrainment come out, because even as a mathematician and, somebody understands the science of what's going on, it shocked me that I thought, wow, this is what's not going in the air.
Right.
And and so you're exactly right. We were collecting, and we have sent the little reentrainment part off to a lab to be tested to see exactly what the composition of it is. And it was mind-blowing that way.
Roger?
Yeah, I had a question on pellet stoves. Are they a problem or
Well, they contribute like everything else. A pellet stove, all else on their operation, fairly clean.
It's 5 degrees.
But I don't remember the exact, but I think it's fair to say that a pellet stove still emits more particulate than a diesel-fired wood. And so,
Yeah, it does.
yeah. But with these in, then they are very clean.
Yeah.
But they burn steady.
A pellet stove with an electrostatic precipitator attached, that's tuned up, can burn as cleanly as natural gas, according to the research we've seen coming out of Europe. And so that's what is commonly.
Doug, can I have it?
He was talking, Nico was talking about New Hampshire, right?
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. So is there legislation in Massachusetts that requires it?
No, they are not in any kind of an attainment problem with the EPA. They just understand the health effects and their doctors are on board.
So the community.
Yeah, and the community realizes that $2,500 is only like 5 asthma reasons. So they get it, the economics of it, and they're putting them in like hotcakes.
But I don't have asthma, and I have $2,500 means a lot.
You're absolutely right. And this whole thing is,
Well, that's
we're
that.
talking about something that might happen 20 years from now, and I'm worried about heating my
Right.
house this year.
Right.
There's your problem.
That's why I was curious about the
$7,000
motivation
a year to heat your home,
adoption.
Yeah.
but you can drop it to $1,500 by putting something one time, $2,500 in there. That makes an economic argument.
But he's paying that $6,000 bill on an installment plan rather than purchase all at once.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. But, I mean, you can do the pencil and paper and see how
Yeah.
much of.
Or find a way to do that on the installment plan. I mean, yeah, I think that there's lots of
Yeah.
opportunities for.
Again, I see there's a lot of market opportunities.
Oh, yeah.
Tremendous.
Well, that's why the whistle's got to be clear.
Yeah. Well,
I'll call him again.
yeah, kind of my intent now is it's going to be a while before it goes through the regulatory process to where these are approved. Right. Unlikely even this year in 2019. And then we're going to be past the deadline and this is going to really get complicated. If we could get enough of these out to start getting some operating experience, and then, worst case scenario, we'll find, oh, this was a bad idea, let's try something else. But it looks promising enough that it seems to me to be worth the risk to invest some money up front and get the operating experience.
So
that's
you're
a big part.
suggesting perhaps the borough invest in a cluster test so that EPA would be able to see the results?
Well, yeah, that'd be great, but that isn't going
Both,
to,
but EPA needs to see.
yeah, that isn't going to happen. What the borough is doing is
Why do you
getting
say it isn't gonna happen?
Because of
boroughs out of
Trains.
business.
Yeah.
No.
Well, they're
But
out of
it's
the
not,
business of
it's not
regulation.
regulating if it's
Oh, yes, well,
voluntary
yeah,
to put
I
them
think that-
in.
yeah.
That people can volunteer to install them
Yes.
and participate.
Anybody can put one in, yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's
no-
not inducement if we can get a cluster.
Yeah, but the borough could pay that. I mean, if the borough is making monies available to install these and people are volunteering to put them in and participate, that is not against, the initiative
Yeah.
allows for that.
What the borough is doing right now is, that RFP that you talked about was the
Doing the test.
quantitative test, so that
Right.
it fits into the SIP plan, and we get some credit for it. That's where they're at right now.
Perhaps everyone with a no-ash should have one of these things.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, that's step A, go out and find the no-ash
Yeah.
people and go out and find the wood boiler people.
Yep.
I'll bet, if you go door-to-door salesman, you can probably sell a lot of these.
But again,
Or make.
when it comes to the
them.
no ash
Yeah, the
people,
no ash, poof.
Some value in a pilot program targeted in the North Pole
Right.
airship.
Yeah.
And so pilot program has a different, something different associated with it than other things, and so that could work, that may have to
Yep.
Yeah.
It's voluntary participation.
We get sourdough fuel to sponsor it.
Well, I think there could be usefulness to the utilities to sponsor it, because if we can drive things down, then they are forced into some.
So who's the champion?
That's me right now, me and
Well, yeah.
and
But-
Gene.
and arguably, and Citizens
Well, I'm
Clean Air.
thinking of it as a business opportunity.
Well, that's what, that'd be the best way to do it.
Yeah. I just need to know some more numbers.
Mhm.
Jim, I think you asked a very good question, who is the champion, and I think, we need to ponder on that a little bit, because that needs to emerge, it needs to be, the interest groups should be the champions, those that are affected. Well, the affected parties are those that burn wood, they're the point sources, and so, who ends up carrying the ball for the group, I don't know. I think I'd like to see the borough take the lead and say this should be a reasonable solution, and they could be the champion, but they're in a difficult place given they don't have the lead anymore.
One of the things, Rick, you and I have talked about is trying to keep the air quality task force alive to some extent, and at least become a voice for a solution. I think it's difficult for the borough to necessarily identify the solution and then, move it forward. But if we could, it just makes sense to me that the air quality task force stay together at least in some form and have a voice in a community solution. Whether it's a co-op or a nonprofit or for-profit business that gets this ultimately going. I think we should at least be able to put together a framework, and the air quality task force seems like to me the right organization to put that framework together.
Sir, if I may.
No, you can't. Please go ahead.
I only have one caveat, and that is, again, I think it is perfectly appropriate that we take a little time to make sure these work, quantify it, and so I just counsel a little bit of patience. Again, we have a tendency to grab a shiny thing and then want to charge and beat up on people if they don't come along. And I think it is perfectly appropriate to spend a little bit of time on the front end to confirm the utility of these things. Looking at this picture, that was one of my first questions to Niko, was, okay, so just let's talk about cleaning. What's the rapidity of cleaning? Is it going to, are we going to, somebody should know that they're going to need to clean their stack twice a year instead of once. Those kinds of things. And so that's my only counsel is just a little bit of patience on the front end. But if they're confirmed, well, then yes, then it's, once we've confirmed it's something to champion, then we can all get on board and move it forward.
I think that's a separate issue. You have a group that's set together in this community for 9 months or so and talked about and informed themselves and talked about solutions to the air quality problem. There's probably a number. There's more than one solution probably, and somebody needs to put together a framework for a solution that might work for this community. It doesn't necessarily have to be this. It could be something else that we're not talking about today that you don't even know about. We could put another group together and educate them and have them start participating. But why not use what we have? Why not build on what we have? I'm a big believer in trying to keep that group together, Patrice.
I agree with using the expertise that's already been brought along. Time is of the essence. Every month we don't clean this up, we have X number of more people getting sick. We have more threat of things happening we don't want to have happen economically. I did just talk with Niko about your question on motivation. If you want to hear the answer, I could give it to you. Why is Massachusetts doing this when there's no regulatory requirement for them to do it? None whatsoever. And it is because the EPA reduced the standard for stoves to 2.0 or under. They can't afford to retrofit. They have a lot of 2.5s, just like we do. And so 2.5 grams per hour of emission. So by putting on the ESP, they've already demonstrated that they fall below that and they don't have to retrofit. They meet EPA standards and they're going to avoid. The other thing is they have really strict rules in their school districts about if you know you can prevent something from happening to kids and you don't, you're in trouble. And so they don't allow, they test the air quality at their school grounds. So everybody that wanted to keep using a biomass wood burner said, okay, in order to keep doing this, we put this on and now we meet the requirement, we don't have to worry.
But there is legislation.
Yeah, regulation.
Well, there is in terms of their school district has a requirement that you have the air as clean as it can possibly be. And if you know there's something that's causing it not to be clean, you have to do something about it. I don't know the law more than that, and it's just kind of in general. But the idea that they want to be preemptive and not have to retrofit again would be something we could all identify with.
Okay, well, it's in my opinion, we have the solution in this community. You know, we push the responsibility to the state, but I really don't see the state taking up a big interest in Fairbanks, Alaska. I don't know how many of you noticed, but Anchorage just stepped up with a $2 billion price tag to fix their port.
Right.
That's going to be fixed before our air quality.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's in our
Yeah,
solution.
it is something we're gonna have to do ourselves.
Yeah.
Can we all start marching on the highway down towards the Anchorage in mass, all
They'll just run us
100,000
over.
of us? I mean, I'm thinking maybe something drastic to get their attention. Hey, we're up here.
Quality
We
Well,
can
thank you,
immigrate to
everybody.
Anchorage